Hello and welcome back to our live coverage of the UN climate talks here in Cancun, Mexico. It's just past 1:15 and we're 15 minutes into our show here. We're going to be here for the next 3.5 hours almost, and we've got some good stuff lined up for you. We're going to be talking to Phil Ireland of Adopt a Negotiator and Alex Stark, also of Adopt a Negotiator. They're going to give us their perspectives on how the talks have progressed. We've also got some interesting stuff on transport at these talks and then some of the latest press conferences to give you as well. If you've tuned in hoping for some coverage of oceans, then we've postponed that. We're going to be doing that later in the week. But let me introduce Rob Skinner. You're from the UN Foundation. Maybe I'll let you introduce yourself, actually. What are you doing here at the talks?
Yeah, I'm Robert Skinner. I'm the Associate Director of the UN Foundation's New York office. And the UN Foundation's been involved with these talks, these climate talks, the COPs as they're referred to, for a number of years. And this is my second, actually. My first was last year in Copenhagen. But the UN Foundation, engages with the UN, as its name would imply. And we try to support UN activities, work around the globe, and one of the programs that we put a lot of our effort into is a climate and energy, climate and environment space, and we are here holding several side events through the UN Foundation. But what I'm doing here specifically is working with the UNFCCC Secretariat, which puts on the talks, in support of their efforts to engage social media, digital media, bloggers, both in and outside of the NGO community, to try and engage that audience and do a better job with the UN system's engagement with that group.
You mentioned new media, social media. I should remind our viewers that this is an interactive channel. You're watching live, so if you have any comments or questions, then you can send them in via Twitter using the hashtag OneClimate, or using our chat box, which is on the oneclimate.net page and also on any embeds you're watching. What role do you think that kind of new media and social media can have at these talks? I know you said you were involved in the Fresh Air Centre, which was kind of a blogging centre in Copenhagen, and now here you're working with the UN. Kind of what potential is there for new and social media to open this process up?
Right, I think that it's the new and social media is a very powerful sector that the UN system, in all honesty, has had a difficult time engaging. The UN system it's a big bureaucracy. There's no question about that, and there are a lot of guidelines, rules, regulations about how the UN system interacts with the media, and then particularly new media specifically. And so, we think, and we talk to the UN system regularly about how it can best engage them. And the UN Foundation, being not part of the UN system but supporting UN efforts, is trying to bridge that gap between the UN system, the big bureaucracy, that's doing great work globally, but then sometimes doesn't do the best job of getting the word out on that, and the communities that care about the issues that the UN works on. So to get the voices out, we worked with, in this case specifically, here in Cancun, we worked with the UNFCCC Secretariat Press Office to get them to establish a blogger loft, for one thing, a space here within the Cancun Mesa, the building that we're in here, so that there would be a place for them to plug in, be able to file their stories, be able to do to tweet, post to their Facebook, do all those social media activities. And we also worked with them to develop a series of programs in the press briefing center here at the Cancun Mesa, where the observer groups that are working here, basically the NGOs that are working out of this space, that have not quite as much access to the other conference center here, where the delegates, where the governments are working, can get interaction and hear from some of the experts that really have been working on these issues for a long time. I mean, I find myself here at these climate talks. Once I think I've got one acronym down, someone will throw 6 more at me, and I've got to kind of figure out what all those mean. And I think that what we need for this interaction is for everyone to speak a language that everyone can get. Because we're all here. You look around this room because everyone here recognizes that this climate issue is a serious one. It's one that we have to deal with. The people of the world have to deal with it now, because it's impacting millions of people already, and it's only going to get more serious. But we have to be able to do it in a language that everyone who's not looking at these subjects every day can understand. And so we're trying to identify people who can communicate in that way, spread the message out, through the powerful media, of the social media channels and networks, and bring more people into the conversation, so that it can be a broader conversation, and more people can really get what's going on here.
And how responsive have you found the UN in this process? I know they've got the UNFCCC, which is the acronym for the climate talks here. Their secretariat, they have their own Facebook and Twitter feeds now, I notice, and they offer live webcasting from some of the conference centres, which is footage we draw on for our broadcasts. It seems that they're being relatively progressive.
Yeah, see, we can't help throwing around the initials and acronyms, right? It's just part of the game here. They're very active in that space. The team that I'm working with the UNFCCC, UNFCCC, however we all want to throw those initials around, is really interested in making what they're doing and what's happening more accessible, and they recognize that social media is the way to do that. One of the issues they have is constraints in terms of staffing and budgets. I mean, they're used to dealing with the traditional media. That's how they're staffed. That's how a lot of the UN system is staffed. And dealing with Facebook and Twitter and those things, you've got to keep them live and keep them active to keep people interested. And so they worked very hard to do that, and I think that this group here is doing a great job of it. They've recognized it a couple of years ago. How this can be a really great tool to get the word out about what the work is that's going on here, and what the governments are doing, and what the UN system is doing to support them. So they've really jumped into it. It was really their idea to bring us in to sort of provide extra staffing to make the conversations that we're going to hold here interesting, and come up with ideas that can help them. And I have nothing but compliments for the effort that's being put forth by that group here in the UN system that's working on this conference in terms of outreach to the social media, new media.
And we should mention that they've been incredibly supportive of us here. It's always a battle to get our internet connection set up and to get a setup like this going, but they've always been very helpful. Do you think that they sometimes struggle, though, to kind of identify the line, because it seems like traditional media is quite kind of separate, and you can block it together, whereas the role of new media crosses between NGOs and then you've got newspapers. And so, for example, the Adopt a Negotiator scheme, which we're partnered with here, they send young people into the talks following their negotiators and make sure they hold them accountable, basically. But actually they do that by blogging, and so you have kind of people who are here on NGO passes, but they're blogging much like the media, and they're going into talks, and then content's coming straight out via Twitter. And it seems like the UN's sometimes a little bit uncomfortable about that. Is this blurring line between the role of media, new media, and non-profits, is that going to cause problems, do you think?
No, I wouldn't describe it as problems, but I think it's something that not only the UN system, but governments, businesses are trying to work with as the media landscape changes. I mean, we're in an era, as you indicated, where it's hard to tell what the line is. What is media now? And as you indicated, a lot of the individuals putting out news from here are the folks following the negotiators that are with them, the NGOs that are here that care about the issues that are being discussed here. There's certainly a lot of traditional media here as well, but how to give access to all of the organizations and individuals that want to be here, want to have media credentials, media passes, so that they get the same access as the New York Times, London Times, Le Monde, others of the traditional media world that are here covering the talks. How to have enough space, for one thing, to grant individuals that kind of access, and how to determine whether someone is actually here to cover the talks in sort of a journalistic sense. It is difficult, and as I indicated, I think that we're all struggling with that a little bit, and the UN system is no different. But I do think that the effort that is being put forth here in Cancun for that outreach is a major step in the right direction, at least in terms of these conferences, the Conference of Party talks on climate change. And I think that the UN system as a whole is recognizing it and trying to manage it as best they can as well. I'm based in the New York office of the UN Foundation and talk regularly with the media personnel at the UN, at UN headquarters, and they're looking at these issues as well and trying to figure out how to allow access to individuals and organizations that are putting out news on the work of the UN, which they want. They want coverage and they want people to know about their work, while at the same time trying to maintain some sort of quality control or or semblance that it just can't be anybody that walks in the door and says, I want to cover this event, whether they've had any background in it or not. It's difficult, but I'm confident that knowing the effort that's going into looking at the situation, that the UN is going to find a way that it can satisfy certainly not everyone, but the vast majority of people that want to cover.
And it's interesting, we've been following these talks live with our video coverage, our interactive video coverage, for 3 years now. We started in Bali, and when we began that, there was massive international media attention on our initiative. I think the Financial Times, the New York Times, Washington Post, they all ran stories on the fact that we were doing kind of live video coverage. It was seen as a real novelty, but the audience itself wasn't as big because the people just weren't engaging or thinking in that way. And then in contrast, in Copenhagen last year, it was picked up by mainstream media. Le Monde embedded our video, and I think 4 million views over the course of 2 weeks, and it's become more of a kind of accepted part of the coverage. Do you think that's a trend that's going to continue? Do you think that it's going to be that actually we might get to a stage where bloggers and new media are a primary source of information for these kinds of talks?
I think that's already happening. I mean, there are so many bloggers that we've talked to that are they're not blogging just for themselves anymore, particularly the ones that have sort of earned a reputation as really being knowledgeable about the subject matter that's being covered here. They do a great job writing about it. They do a great job getting video or audio out, and so they've been blogging sort of on their own or for their own organization, but they're being picked up by major news organizations now as well. So I think that that certainly has increased, as you indicated, over the last 2 or 3 years at these events, and I just think that's going to continue as newspapers and other and television outlets recognize that they can get access to these events and get access to news by not always having to be everywhere covering everything. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing completely. I mean, there's arguments both ways that when the major media outlets are just maybe taking other people's work for less than they deserve, maybe for in terms of income for the work they're doing. That's maybe not a great thing, but it certainly provides a lot more coverage of events like this when there are so many individuals here that would be covering anyway, and then it allows the major outlets to maybe devote a little bit more column space to these issues.
I think it shifts the tone as well, though, because you mentioned there big mainstream media outlets taking people's work for less money than they maybe deserve, but actually there seems to be much more of a culture of sharing and open source in new media. So, for example, our own channel is kind of the content is built from people here. It's not produced by us. It's guests who come on. It's our partners that tick, and we kind of we source our content that way, but also it's distributed in an open source way, like it's embeddable on websites for free, and actually it kind of is a reflection of the kind of the commitment and compromise and the new kind of attitudes that are maybe required in the long term in these kinds of talks. Do you think there's a broader kind of shift towards like an open source that might flip from the digital hemisphere and digital sphere into kind of our real world lives, that maybe we can kind of have some kind of hope or aspiration that this is going to be part of the future, part of the solution? Am I being a little bit hopeful?
Well, yeah, you're being hopeful, but so am I. I think that I certainly would like to see that happen anyway, especially as in talks like these, where we can recognize that an issue like climate change, we're all in it together. It's an issue that crosses borders, and these national positions are in many cases not getting us that far. As we look at these talks, and we have to figure out a way to come up with a global solution to a global problem. And looking at the way that new media is sharing and open sourcing and trying to find a way to get the information out as just an important piece of information, and not necessarily in such a competitive way, I think could be a good model. And I would completely agree with you, though. What I've seen in terms of sharing of sources and sharing of coverage and sharing of news was really incredible. And the first time I really recognized it was last year in Copenhagen, when we worked with Tick 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 on their Fresh Air Center, which was last year in Copenhagen was actually a physical space where bloggers were given workspace and provided with sort of expert dialogue, and were able to follow the talks from there if they weren't able to get into the main conference hall, and sort of the spirit of sharing and the spirit of we're all in this together. We really need to get this news out, and if someone had an interview that somebody else didn't have, the idea that that it would be shared and everyone could use it, was really encouraging, and I think allowed the bloggers that were working there, the new media that were working there, to reach a much wider audience, with the information that was being produced. Everyone didn't have to be everywhere at the same time, which made the coverage much broader.
Well, Rob, I could probably chat to you for another 20 minutes or so, but we need to leave it there so we can push on with our coverage. Thank you ever so much for joining us, and I'm sure we'll catch up with you later in the week as well.
Yeah, pleasure to be here.
Thank you. So we're going to go to a video now.